talking about AI is mainly talking about dilemmas. So our next speaker, Artemis Seaford, she's head of AI safety ElevenLabs, is going to focus on trust, security, and Europe's competitive edge. And I would like to call to the stage Mrs. Seaford, and the moderator is Matina Charkoftaki, my dear colleague from Καθημερινή.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session. It's a pleasure to be here today, and as we dive in a very crucial conversation about AI dilemmas. In the recent years, AI has entered dynamically our lives, is transforming economies, industries, is redefining the way we work, we react, is opening new opportunities and possibilities, but also come with pressing concerns about trust, safety, and competitiveness. Concerns that become more and more urgent than ever. To navigate these complexities, I'm honored to be with us Artemis Seaford. She's head of AI safety at ElevenLabs. It's a company that produces audio and voice AI. It can generate any voice that you can imagine. And she has a wealth of experience, having worked at OpenAI to ensure the safe deployment of AI models, previously leading Meta's global response to geopolitical and adversarial threats. Artemis, welcome. It's a pleasure for us to have you here. She comes from California. She's Greek, but she works in California.
Thank you, Matina, for this very kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here today.
So, we have a lot to discuss about AI dilemmas, and let me start by asking you about how we can build public trust in AI while ensuring accountability and reliability.
Absolutely, once I've managed to work through this bottle. So it's a real pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to see all these people here, especially young people, engaging in this topic. This is exactly how we manage the alleged dilemma between trust and innovation in AI. So I just want to remind everybody, in case it hasn't been clear in previous panels, that this is an incredible moment. This is a moment that we've never seen before, not only in our living history, but in global history, and we haven't yet fully grasped its implications. In other words, if you think that your life has already changed because of AI, just wait a second. It's about to get a lot more exciting in the next few years. Now, given how fast the technology has developed, everything else has not yet managed to keep up pace with it. And what is everything else? It's both regulation. So how do we ensure that this technology is developed and deployed safely? How do we build trust, both in consumers and in businesses, to use AI? But also innovation, absorption. Right now, the level of the models out there far surpasses what we have managed as a society, as a business community, to do with these models. In other words, even if models stopped advancing now, which they won't, we will still see a lot more progress in the next few years and a lot more impact of AI in our lives just through closing the gap between current levels of adoption, which are quite low, and future levels of adoption that hopefully are going to be higher.
How can we accelerate the rate of adoption?
Now, that is a great question. So the last figures I remember is that in the Northern Europe, Denmark, Finland, Norway, etc., about 25% of companies use AI, according to a recent survey. Southern Europe, Italy, Spain, Greece, only about 5% of them do. So we have a long way to go. So there's no easy answer how we increase adoption, but there are some basic pillars we bear in mind. One is regulation. So there is this tendency lately to talk about regulation as a binary. You either have it or you don't have it. That is a weird frame. It's an outcome of people that either don't want regulation or people that want regulation at all costs. They all converge on this binary, right? Either have it or don't have it. Clearly, what you want to do with regulation is have the right regulation. And we heard about that in the previous panel. We can discuss more if of interest in this one. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that there is a certain amount of social infrastructure and business infrastructure that is needed to make good use of AI. For example, one of the priorities of this government, and any government when it comes to AI, is introduce AI in schools, AI literacy. It's not the case that schools shouldn't use AI because AI is going to enable students to cheat. I mean, there is that concern. But the most important concern is how do we enable young children today to understand how to use AI? And what does that mean? It means understanding its potential, but also understanding its risks, understanding what a savvy AI user is. So that's one thing. Businesses. Almost every business has productivity gains out of using AI, especially businesses that are heavy on white collar. So the easiest thing for a business to use is enable its workforce to become more productive by using AI. And the setup costs for that are quite minimal, right? Because AI, unlike previous technological transformations, is much more plug and play, right? Everybody can access the latest models. So you don't really need a whole bunch of infrastructure in-house in order to be able to give your employees access to AI. Now, you need a whole set of other things to make absorption more effective, but as a first level, is already available to everyone.
Except from understanding the use and the potentials of AI, how can we trust, how can a user is sure that he cannot manipulate the answer or the information that they receive from AI tools? And on the other hand, how can we ensure that AI algorithm does not use data in order to manipulate users or steer them into a certain direction?
Yeah, this is a very good question. So, in the ancient history of 2022, people used to talk a lot about hallucinations as a problem, right? Like, the AI tells you something, and it says it with absolute confidence, and maybe it cites sources, but it's all not true. And you wouldn't be able to tell. Mm-hmm. That problem is quickly going away. Is it perfect right now? No. Can you trust absolutely everything it says? Probably not. But soon enough, the hallucination problem, in other words, the technical kind of gap where the AI system tells you something is true without knowing or disclosing is not true, is not going to be a problem. We're already almost there. Now, does that mean you can just trust whatever an AI system tells you? No, because we're going to have a series of new problems. And the problems there are going to be who's controlling the AI and what do they want you to do, right? So right now, we talk about echo chambers a lot in social media contexts. And when Democrats in America wonder, well, how is it possible Republicans vote for Trump? What they don't understand a lot of the time is that if they go on Fox News, the reality they're getting is completely different than if they go on New York Times. Mm-hmm. Both of these are kind of true, right? Like, both of these are arguably a correspondence to what's happening. They're not complete fibs, they're not complete falsities, but they're completely different. Like, you think you live in a different planet, depending on what media you consume. The same applies to what online communities you're part of, right? What is your friendship circle on social media, etc., hence the echo chamber effect. Now, you can all appreciate, and there has been much discussion, you can't run a democracy when people don't have a shared basis of fact, right? They don't agree on what's going on. It's just not quite possible to do it well, at least. In a world where we all consume our news and our information and our sense of reality through not going to New York Times or Fox News, through not even going to Facebook or Instagram, but instead on going directly to an AI model, you can appreciate that whoever has control over that model has immense control over the world. And if we end up in a world where that is consolidated, then those few players that control the big models can essentially control the global mind. If we end up in a world, on the other hand, where that is extremely fragmented, we're going to end up with what we have today, supercharged, which is you get whatever information you want based on who you're asking. So there's two problems with manipulation. One is that you get the authoritative version of the truth, and one is that you get whatever version, whatever is manipulated you want you to believe, and everyone has their own version. Both are problems. Okay. So what we need to make sure, to conclude, is that with AI, we have transparency standards for whoever is making those models publicly available. So that means regulation, the right kind of regulation, to ensure that those standards apply in a way where there is no manipulation of the public without its consent and awareness.
Yes, and what about the information? Because I've heard a lot of people telling me that AI, the algorithm, sometimes generates fake codes or cites in non-existent sources, fabricates information. And considering that the younger generation is today is searching not through internet, but is using a lot AI tools to find answers, how this shift, what are the implications of this shift?
I think the implications are great. Like, it's pretty cool that if you have a random question about a topic, you can just go and get a very complete and coherent answer on it, right? I mean, we started with the encyclopedia. I'm old enough to remember going to my grandparents' library and pulling down the encyclopedia and kind of reading all the entries that started with the same alphabetical letter. So that's, one way of consuming knowledge. Then you had the search engine, where effectively you get a lot of sources, but you have to synthesize them, right? You don't get complete answers. You don't get argument, counter-argument. But now you go to AI, you get a complete statement. You get the argument, the counter-argument, as much detail as you want. You can zoom in to any specific angle you want. You can zoom out. So, I think that reaches the pinnacle of how we are able to consume knowledge. Now, the hallucination problem, as we talked about earlier, is still there, but less and less over time.
Okay. And because you mentioned a lot the word regulation, and trust is deeply linked to rules and policies, and with EU taking a strong role in regulating AI, what do you think about their approach, and if this approach can help Europe to maintain competitiveness ahead the global AI race? And I will mention only because it really took me by surprise. I read a few months ago the ex-CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, that he said that USA is 2 to 3 years ahead of AI from China, but Europe is too busy regulating. And there's always that problem that Europe wants to set strict global standards.
Right. So I would dispute both parts of that quote in different ways. First, it's not clear anymore that China is, in fact, 2 or 3 years behind the US, depending on how you count, right? But DeepSeek is, by some standards, matches, if not surpasses, American models. Now, in other ways, America still has an advantage. But 2 or 3 years might be, at this point, a bit much. On the regulation front, we talked about smart regulation. So there are at least 3 problems, high level, with EU regulation, right? A, it takes a long time. We were looking at drafts of the EU AI Act in 2019. I can't even describe to you how different the technology is today. So it takes a long time. Secondly, it's not harmonized. So there are about 100 laws at least across the EU, at the EU level and member state level, that have to do with AI. If you're a company like ours today, you have to worry about the DSA and the DMA and data localization and GDPR and now the EU AI Act, and it's kind of a nightmare. And it's not clear what the harmonized framework is requiring us to do. So harmonization is the second part.
Okay.
And then it's quite vague. Because of the difficulty of creating that regulation, things like the EU AI Act still is pretty vague and high level, which increases compliance costs because companies don't quite know what they're going to have to comply with, right? Not for a long time. And when you have ambiguity, what is the response of the business community? Risk aversion. So you see Meta, OpenAI saying, you know what? If we can't deploy in Europe, because it's all these problems, right? The regulation is kind of antiquated, it's not harmonized, it's very vague, then we just won't. Europe doesn't quite have the purchasing power parity, sadly, that it did even 5 years ago. So now big companies can say, you know what, if you're trying to over-regulate us, we just won't bother. And that is a problem. But the response here is not just, okay, let's scrap regulation. The response is harmonize, make it more specific, and also iterate. So now in the US, Alondra Nelson, who used to head the Office of Science and Technology under Biden, who's very pro-regulation, is talking about iterative regulation. So we put regulation in place, we try it out, we see if it works, we iterate, exactly as the business community does.
Okay. And what other steps should Europe take in order to be competitive? You said that you said earlier in our personal discussion that one thing is innovation.
Sure. So, okay, so two things. And there were lots of interesting thoughts in the previous panel as well. I wish we could sort of engage more. Mm-hmm. But I am not completely convinced regulation is the main reason that Europe is staying behind. It might be a reason, but especially when it comes to AI, bear in mind, EU AI Act is not even enacted yet. Like, it's starting to get enacted since last August, but most of it is not even at play. So it's not quite that, like, the development of models in Europe didn't happen because of regulation. Now, you can say GDPR could have had an inhibitory effect, right? Because under GDPR, you cannot easily use personal data. But actually, you know, a half-competent AI engineer creating training models could probably figure out ways to expunge personal data from them. So it's not super clear to me that the reason why we don't have a European OpenAI is because of European regulation. Although I'm open to the argument that it might have had a role. I think the reason why we don't have it, frankly, is because we're not very good at attracting talent. George Hinton, who is Canadian, and is a direct path to creating the modern models, ended up at Google. Why? Because Google paid him a really big amount of money to go there, right? So how are we attracting this talent in the EU if we're not willing to pay for it? So there's a bunch of other things. Another thing I want to highlight is what does it mean to be competitive in the first place? So we heard also in the previous panel, and you will hear it a lot, that, oh my God, we're not competitive, we're falling behind because we just don't have the big models. Okay, I don't think that's true. I don't think Europe wins or fails the race because it builds big models to compete with OpenAI and Google and Meta of the world. It's great to have the big models, it's good Mistral is doing it. It's also a debate there about, you know, open source, proprietary, what does it even mean to have a business model around open source models? But we don't have to get there. I think Europe wins or loses the AI race based on three other factors. The first is compute. Mm-hmm. So we need to make sure that the businesses in Europe have access to cheap compute. And that we see there's a bunch of good things happening there at the European level, and Greece has benefited from some of those by building data centers, etc. here. Second is data. The competition over data is fierce. So data are important to train the models, right? So to some extent, how good your models are will depend on how much and how high quality your data are. There's been some attenuation of that problem through the creation of synthetic data, where you get the model to create the data that then you use to create other models. But still, having access to high-quality data, especially specialized data for industry use cases, is paramount. Okay. There, it's back to the regulation point, we need data harmonization. We need data lakes that companies can leverage to build customized AI, especially in the industrial sector. Right now, you even see examples of AI models moving from hospital to hospital because you can't pull the data, so you just move the algorithm around. That makes no sense, right? So we need to fix the data problem where we could be competitive, but we're not right now. And thirdly, crucially, is absorption. And I think that's the most important part. I think Europe wins or loses in AI based on whether its companies and its governments manage to absorb AI effectively and quickly in order to remain productive in whatever industry they are at the global level.
Okay, you said the data competition is fierce and we have to absorb AI. So I want to shift the focus to Greece's position and how Greece could benefit from AI. In the recent years, there have been some efforts through private and public sector to integrate AI applications, mostly with the help of RRF funds. But the truth is that it's a difficult thing to do, and we are struggling. What do you think that Greece could do further in order to strengthen its position regarding AI?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, the difficulty in this is always in the implementation. You know, like the policy answer is pretty straightforward. The difficulty, as Vasilis knows, is, okay, how do you take that pretty straightforward policy answer and make it reality given all the structural limitations you have in place?
Okay.
So what does Greece have to do at the policy level, which is easy for me to say because I don't have to deal with all the adoption that Vasilis and others have, is you need to incentivize these businesses to absorb AI and to figure out how to do it well. And that is not just giving businesses direct incentives, but also like creating an ecosystem and incentivizing the ecosystem to allow the business community to figure out adoption within itself, right? So there are many companies, for example, that specialize in helping others adopt AI, right? And many of them are not the traditional players that we see in technology procurement that are sort of controlling the field in many countries, including Greece. So how do you bring these players into the market? So instead of trying to get the government to do things, how does the government work as a catalyst of the private sector doing things by itself? And then government is a huge use case. I'm really excited to see and hear about all these innovations that are happening at the governmental level. Huge potential to transform government through AI. Incredible. And I don't need to tell you guys here in Greece that how urgently we need it here. We need to transform government yesterday. Not just government, but how public sector works.
Yes, because it's like the answer for bureaucracy and cutting cost and time. And there are some projects in the public sector in this direction. But as I said, in practice, we're facing some difficulties to deploy, but we're in a good direction.
Yes. Can I say maybe to add to this thing? So on the government side, you know, it's kind of easy to do a couple of like cool things and showcase them in government and say, look, like we did it. It's much harder to do and implement solutions at scale that are really transformative. So how do you do that? First, I think you need to look at things that are not AI, that are problems in government that you need to do first in order to be able to leverage AI. And one is technological and the other is sort of business. Technological is that you need the right people in government that understand technology and can make it work. So a couple of years ago, I was talking to someone in government, and that was, by the way, after the whole digital transformation thing. I was talking to someone in government here, and I asked them, how many data scientists do you have in the whole of the public sector in Greece? In the whole of government, right? And the answer was 0. 0 data scientists in the whole of government in Greece. That is inconceivable, because you know what data scientists do? They analyze your data and they tell you things. Like they tell you what policy is working and is not working. They tell you things about the people you're trying to serve, right? They tell you things about how you can make things better. And the fact that the government is sitting on all of this data and it can't leverage it effectively to even understand what's going on, that is crazy. It doesn't make any sense. So you need to bring the right talent in to be able to kind of deploy and use the AI. And there are efforts there that are really great, but we need to do more of that. Second, you need the business sense. You don't just unleash AI in government or in a company and kind of let it do its work. What you need first to do is understand what are your business workflows, what are you trying to streamline, and what does it make sense to automate, either through AI or through some other means.
Mm-hmm. As a head of AI safety at ElevenLabs, what means for you the word safety in AI in practical terms?
So I lead a team at ElevenLabs. ElevenLabs, as Matina, you mentioned, is the global leader in AI, voice and audio. And what does that mean? We produce models that are on the cutting edge that allow people to do things with voice, with audio and content, to make content accessible in any language everywhere. So things you can do now with our models and with voice models you couldn't do before. Instant translation in any language. So say you have a film, right? What's your favorite film or series? You can translate that in any language, and the voices are the same. So you can hear Sean Connery speaking Chinese. Audiobooks, anything that has to do with translating content. A really cool use case, you should try it if you haven't, is voice cloning. So at this point, you can use AI to instantly clone your voice in any language, which is really cool, but also really scary, right? Yes. Because that opens the door for a lot of manipulation, a lot of deception, and a lot of crime, potentially. So my job and the job of my team is to make sure that bad things don't happen using our tools. So we have a team of technologists, operational specialists, policy specialists that work together to, for example, make sure that fraud doesn't happen using voice cloning.
Yes, because AI is accessible also to crime, like they can be used. So we have to be very careful and cautious and about all these subjects. You were telling me about the security and how AI could play a role in security. Can you elaborate more about that?
Oh my goodness, this is a whole other talk, but let me try. So AI leaves systems and societies open to higher security threats because, as you said, bad guys have access to AI. So it used to be in the past, for example, that if you're a cyber attacker and you want to penetrate a system, it would be really hard to find what is called a zero-day exploit or an exploit, right? You'd have to figure out, okay, how does the code work, and can I kind of trial and error, and it would be really hard. Now that's trivialized because AI systems can just generate these zero-day exploits very trivially if they're good. However, the cyber defense industry also has access to AI, so you can patch those vulnerabilities that leave you open to these exploits very quickly. So sort of an arms race is supercharged. But what you want to make sure, if you are in charge of vulnerable systems, like every society is, including this one, is that you don't fall behind, right? That you are leveraging AI to close your vulnerabilities as bad actors are trying to exploit them. So that's one part of security. But importantly in this moment and in this continent, we're in a moment where there is increasing consensus that we need to rethink our defense policy, right? And arguably up it. And AI should be at the center of how we do that. Because what does a modern defense system mean? It essentially means a technology-first system that leverages automation. Now, we actually have a unicorn in Europe that does defense. It's in Germany, it's called Helsing. So that's an interesting use case. But as these two conversations converge, how do we have AI innovation with defense policy converge? To how do we leverage and incentivize the sector on defense to make sure that our military systems are up to scratch? And also we have control over supply chains. So control over supply chains sadly needs to be kind of something we think about across all sectors as countries are beginning to exercise a more protectionist spirit, let's say. But it's absolutely crucial in defense. So when it comes to European systems, we're extremely dependent on American components and American tech. And maybe that's okay, but maybe that won't be that okay in the next few years. So we need to, alongside automating our military and our defenses, exercise control over our supply chains.
Okay. I think the time is up. Thank you for the enlightening discussion. It was a pleasure. And thank you all for your time and attention. Stay with us because we handle over the next panel. Thank you. Thank you, Artemis.